What's going on, fellas? Continuing my streak of cobbling together this upload schedule with, so far, the most popular running series in the regular uploads, Top Something or Other Tuesdays, where I give you my top lifts or tips or whatever else for XYZ task. Today's top three is coming from none other than the Grand Master of YouTube titles and thumbnails, Paris himself. And he has requested that we do the top three exercises for getting wide in all caps, because I'm trying to be popular. And to be popular on YouTube, all caps is absolutely necessary. Now, a quick little preamble. Those of you who are regulars on the channel, you all know this. I figured this might get a few more views because of the caps in the title, because that's how that works. My training has always been kind of performance centric. I am a competitive strongman. I used to do powerlifting. I am not a bodybuilder. This is not necessarily a bodybuilding channel, but that being said, putting on muscle is a pretty integral part of the process of getting stronger. So I do have some of my own speculation about ways in which that is effectively done. But that being said, this is all from the lens of maybe a non-bodybuilder, someone whose goals have always been, okay, well, maybe a 1 rep max, maybe a rep PR, maybe how fast I go with a given carry, how far I throw something, how high I throw something, different endurance metrics. That's kind of what always got me out of bed and excited to go to the gym, is the premise of week after week, seeing incremental improvements in these performance metrics. My goals have never been like, oh, the reason I'm coming into this session is to get my chest bigger. Getting my chest bigger might be a means to an end to seeing numerical increases in my bench press. And that's always what's excited me. But that being said, I have seen that chasing certain performance metrics has correlated with different changes in my physique. And that is kind of where I guess that is the degree to which I care about physique, is kind of, I think it's really cool that it's a reflection of those performance metrics. You know, how I look is a byproduct of the things I'm capable of doing. And I've always found that cool. And I found that certain tasks challenged on a weekly basis, twice a week, thrice a week, they correlate with different looks in the physique. So if you're someone who has some blend of goals between how you look and how you perform, and you aren't competitive in something, you have the freedom of selecting different performance metrics that might correlate with how you look, right? With a look that you desire to have. Now, is that the most efficient way of getting that look? No, I'm not saying that. Right? There's probably a more direct A to B route. But if the A to B route of like optimized bodybuilding training or bodybuilding training for the sole goal of bodybuilding, the most effective way we maybe could get towards that goal, if that training doesn't excite you, I don't think it's unreasonable to say, well, hey, maybe we could select a performance metric, kind of skew our training that is going to correlate well with that result we want to have. So I'm here to tell you some things I've kind of done in my training that I noticed I got a good bit wider when I started doing. So the first one, if you guys have been around on the channel, you'll know my little anecdote. I got into lifting. I kind of found my way into powerlifting. So I started training the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, because those were what I understood to be the extent of fundamental strength training. And I put on a lot of muscle. I developed in muscularity, but my physique was not well-rounded by any means. My legs got quite big quite quickly. Part of that was a genetic predisposition. Part of that was the large amount of leg assistance volume I was doing to drive my squat up. My midsection got quite developed. My pecs got very big. My back thickness got good. But I was very narrow, and that was kind of the byproduct of those being my only three performance metrics. There was not a whole lot of width to my physique. There was a lot of thickness from front to back, but not a lot of width. And it wasn't until I started getting into more strength training as a broader spectrum than just powerlifting, and I started working on my overhead press. And the two things that I noticed was, after that first training cycle, I was visibly wider across the shoulders. Just that extra development of the delts changed how I looked drastically. The next training cycle, a little bit more to my overhead press, a little bit more to my overhead press. And I got wider and wider. And suddenly, what I thought was a normal physique, I looked back on and I realized, wow, I was really narrow for a relatively muscular guy, until I really started putting an equal emphasis on my overhead strength to my bench strength. Now, the things I've realized past this point is what specifically we're doing on that overhead, that matters less. It's more the fact that we are placing a high priority on driving up some kind of overhead metric that really led me to realize these kind of visual differences. So whether I'm training for a 1 rep max, a 3 rep max, a 5 rep max, or even a 10 rep max, right? We're going to be doing volume. And yeah, the phases of training where we're working in that 1 to 4 rep range, those probably aren't moving us towards that secondary goal of looking wider, right? And that's kind of the argument against the whole, oh, you want to put on size, just power lift, right? That's really effective. Well, some of it is effective. Most powerlifters will spend dedicated amounts of time for hypertrophy training, but that dedicated time spent in peaking phases isn't really moving you towards your bodybuilding goal. Now, if your goal is some amalgam of performance and visuals, then okay, we can justify spending a little bit of time working that 1 to 3 range. Maybe we are chasing a 5 rep max, a 10 rep max. Maybe we're doing strict press. Maybe we're doing more of a push press, maybe we're doing in front of the neck, maybe we're doing behind the neck. What I've observed is all of these things are secondary to the fact that we're placing a high emphasis on seeing continual improvements in some kind of performance metric. Even if that performance metric might be a step away from optimal in something like a 1 rep max, where we're working in non-hypertrophy relevant rep ranges. And by non-hypertrophy relevant, I mean non-hypertrophy optimal rep ranges. There's going to be a bulk of training. The majority of your training cycle is going to be done in preparation for that 1 rep max with sub-maximal percentages that are relevant to putting on muscle. Whether we go into that 85+% zone at the end kind of comes down to your personal goals. What I do nowadays is for my push press, I will absolutely take it up to 100 and hopefully 101%, hit a new PR. But for my strict pressing work, I don't really take it much past about 90%. I'm looking for 3 to 4 reps at the end of the training cycle, and that's what I'm peaking towards rather than a 1 rep max, because I'm not asked to ever do a 1 rep max strict pressing competition. As much as I think it's fun, it is not really driving me towards my goal to spend much time in that 1 to 3 rep range. So that would be my first tip, is identifying something you enjoy that's really in the overhead plane and looking for block after block after block of seeing, like, not just those beginner gains of, oh, I've never really done much vertical pressing before, I'm going to get way better initially, but keeping your foot on the gas. And once those gains get hard, right? Because when we start doing a new motion, a lot of that progress we see in performance is just neural adaptation. Our body's getting more efficient at a motor pattern it wasn't previously familiar with, right? So it's not saying, oh, well, I had 50 pounds of my overhead press. That means I added like 50 pounds of primary tissue worth of muscle, right? No, that's not what happened. You get more efficient, right? Same thing when people just get into strength training in the first place. A lot of those initial adaptations are neural. It's once those initial gains start to slow down and we're squeaking out 5 pounds every couple of weeks, that's where we're really going to be sticking with it and putting on that tissue, right? And that's why I'm kind of against rotating movements rapidly, because you feel like you're like shocking the body, and we're getting these okay, well, as soon as those rapid gains run out, we're going to rotate. Well, cool, we made our rapid gains in terms of neural adaptation, but we haven't gotten into the weeds and really put on that lean tissue of getting better once we're already decent at the movement. So I find that people will lean into rotating things as soon as those beginner gains run out on a motion, and I think that's a bit of a mistake. So finding an overhead movement that you like chasing performance metrics, selecting smart performance metrics based on your goals, and getting after it. Now, the second movement is going to be a bit of a cheat, because it's going to be a group of movements, and it's going to be all of the assistance work and shoulder stability work that I began doing following adding an overhead press that I found made me that much wider. So that first training cycle, I was already a 400-pound bencher. So just adding in overhead press, I believe 2 times per week, working quite hard on it, I saw this rapid growth. It went up. I had some of those requisite qualities from being a big bencher that laid some foundation for being a big strict presser. So I saw all of this initial growth. And then things started to slow down, and I needed to start really actually learning what I was doing, not just capitalizing what I was capable of because of my bench press. I needed to start being like, okay, well, what are good overhead pressers doing? And you'll see a lot of them will do general hypertrophy work for the lateral head and the rear head of the shoulder, and a lot of work for the upper back, all of which are vital for stabilizing a heavyweight overhead. We don't want to be that guy who's restricted through the lat mobility, restricted through the pecs, and he's just holding that weight out in front of him, all in the front delts. A good overhead athlete is able to drive that weight back and hold that weight across their traps, across their upper back, and that requires a lot of musculature across the upper back, the rear shoulder. So we want to do exercises to reflect that. So I started doing things like Powell raises, which I think are a very good exercise that most people should be doing. I started doing things like various rear delt flies. I started doing things like face pulls, IYT raises, trap 3 raises, right? I started implementing all these different shoulder stability and then just general musculature across the upper back. I started working on that, kind of including the lateral delts. And the combination, laterals could be included in there, but those were kind of the main things I hammered were the face pulls, the Powell raises, the IYT raises, the tons of different rear delt flies, whether that's bent over with dumbbells, whether that's a crossbody cable type of one. Tons of stuff I stole from John Meadows. Just a lot of work for that rear shoulder and upper back region. Made me a lot better overhead. Gave me this solid overhead position that I lacked before. Made my shoulders feel wonderful compared to when I first started getting into overhead pressing. Was doing a lot for the front of the shoulder girdle. Not a lot of work for the back of the shoulder girdle. They felt a little snappy and banged up through the front. As soon as I started doing all of this work across the upper back and for the rear shoulder, they started feeling a lot better. And then the other thing I noticed was once again, I kind of leveled up in terms of how wide I was. And, you'll hear a lot of bodybuilders talk about like, oh yeah, the lateral delt, and then the rear delt will kind of push that lateral head forward a little bit and make you look even wider. So if we were talking about the most efficient means to an end, we might just do a ton of lateral raises. And that might be a very effective way of putting width on the physique. But like I said, I'm a performance metric guy. I like my performance metrics. And so if you're a performance metric guy and you just want a performance metric that's also going to lead to you being a wide ass dude, I definitely think overhead and its corresponding assistance work is very meriting of that task. Now, the third one. Once again, it's kind of two motions because Paris said 3, so we're fitting it into 3. The third category that made me a lot wider, right? So I saw that initial growth because now my performance metrics at that point in time were bench, overhead, squat, and deadlift. And that was kind of what my training reflected. I hadn't really got into strongman yet. I wasn't push pressing. I wasn't doing loaded carries. I wasn't doing all these other things that I found had impacts on my physique. So I was like, okay, well, these are my 4 main ones that I'm going to keep my foot on the gas. I don't want to split my focus across too many tasks and do a really bad job of all of them. I want to keep my eye on what is it that I really want to be good on. And at the time, those were my 4 things. Now, fast forward a little bit down the line, I started getting into specifically neutral grip chin-ups. Now, I was doing upper back work. I was doing some pull-ups, I was doing some pull-downs, I was doing some rows, all of which to support my bench pressing and my deadlifting and my squatting endeavors, right? So I was doing enough work for my lats to where they weren't the limiting factor and they weren't getting in the way of my ability to deadlift more, to bench more, or to squat more, right? So I was doing just enough. And it wasn't until I played around with the concept of using a close grip, neutral chin, trying to pull my chest as close to the bar as possible as another performance metric. So it's not just a means to an end to assist my deadlift, but this is another core gauge of my overall physical development. I'm chasing maybe rep PRs, total volume PRs. I'm really big on the total volume PRs at different loading ranges, so different weights, maybe with one band assist, body weight, plus 25, plus 45, working for total volume PRs was something that I did a lot of. There's tons of different ways, just like any other lift, there's tons of different ways you can go about your progression scheme and gauging your performance, whether you quantify that, whether you quantify your performance metric as rep PRs, 1 rep max, work within a certain amount of time, total workload across a session, however you do it, as long as we're seeing those incremental increases, we're going to take our lat development past just being a means to an end to our deadlift and push it to a means to an end to having a really strong chin up, which is going to take you way above and beyond. And once I started doing those neutral chins specifically and chasing these total volume markers, once again, I had kind of stagnated in what I looked like. I was getting stronger and stronger and I was putting on muscle here and there, but I wasn't seeing these big fundamental changes to my physique like I had earlier in my training when I started working on my overhead press. When I started working on my squat, I saw these big changes in how I looked and how I performed across a wide variety of tasks. And when I started getting into these neutral chins, I saw the same thing. Once again, I got a bit wider. And that was pretty cool to see because I kind of identified at this point, I had some ideas in my head that maybe strongman was a better test of the kind of strength that I'm interested in than powerlifting, right? Because I don't want to just know who has the most hyper-specific 1 rep max in a given task. I want to know who has the best 1 rep max, the best 5 rep max, different heights for the pulls. I want explosiveness to matter. I want conditioning to matter. I want to know who's the real like total package in terms of physicality. And I started to draw towards that. And it crossed my mind that, hey, I'm probably going to need a little bit more upper back muscle and muscle through my biceps to carry and hold all of these things. And none of my current 4 performance metrics seem to be addressing those physical qualities. You know, deadlift is a pivotal part of being a strongman. What the high bar squat is to a weightlifter, the deadlift is to a strongman. You could argue it's even more important, right? Because all weightlifters are doing some kind of high bar or front squats because they correlate with the general physical qualities a good weightlifter has. So they're used as, yeah, we don't compete in this, but this is a central part of our development towards the kind of athlete that has success in this sport. Well, the deadlift correlates with a bunch of other things in strongman, so it would probably be used very heavily regardless. And then it's also a competitive event, unlike the high bar squat for a weightlifter. So even more emphasis on it. That's the bread and butter. Squatting, I just find it correlates positively with enough events. It's a good whole body strength builder, very much merits its place as a general strength movement or a performance metric. Overhead, you could argue the need for bench press in there. I could probably be talked out of it if you just say, oh, I'll just do dips instead, kind of keep that surplus of tricep strength. I'd be like, all right, fine. As much as I like benching, but you got the overhead, you got the push press. And I was like, none of these things are really kind of targeting that upper body pulling musculature and working that to its capacity. So I started doing these neutral chins, and boom, again, for the first time in a long time, 5-6 years into my training, just suddenly one block, I started looking really different, and I started feeling really different in how I would engage with weights when I would pull them towards me, when I would lock into place on a deadlift. And then the other one that kind of contributed to this width was when I started doing heavy dumbbell rows, and I really got the tech down because I had done plenty of heavy dumbbell rows in my life. I really like them. I like that anti-rotational aspect of them. Work the midsection for a task that maybe I don't feel like doing. Some Pallof presses. I can hit 2 birds with 1 stone really effectively and get in some of my horizontal rowing with a dumbbell row. And it wasn't until I kind of learned how to row low towards that back hip, really kind of get the bicep out of it a little bit. Think about, okay, what we're moving is the elbow. We're trying to dig that elbow really deep relative to our rib cage. And then we almost want to think about the forearm is just a rope. The hand is a hook that's tied to the dumbbell. It's just swinging, hanging below that elbow that we're just stretching far, digging deep over and over and over. And I started to really be able to bias the dumbbell row towards my lats. It used to be a good whole back development tool. I'd get a bit of a rear delt pump, a bit of a rear trap pump, rhomboid, lat, kind of be the whole thing. And once I started doing them a little bit different, I really felt like it was biasing heavily towards my lat, to where my lat would be what would get sore and pumped, and the rest of my back probably wouldn't get as sore and pumped. And once again, I just saw, okay, cool, I feel really good ripping into my deadlift off the floor, and I look wide. I look like I'm good at ripping my deadlift off the floor. So those would be my 3. If you guys have more you want to see in this series, put them below. I have a bunch of ones still from that first video, so no shortage of ideas. We got at least 6 weeks to go of Top Tuesdays before I have to do any creative thinking. Thank you guys for watching.